See, because he's half. Half of what? He's half of what? Is he half Nephilim? Because he can't be half Noah and half, is he half Noah? Is he half Nama? Half what? The Semite people or the Shemite people are half of what? A half of Japheth? Half a half? What is the half? But it is ironic that Shem name means fame, and that the Nephilim's name means what? Fame. The men of fame. Is that ironic, or is that evidence, a fingerprint, something left so that it would be obvious for those who are seeking and digging for this knowledge, digging for that buried treasure, and trying to sift through all this and trying to find that piece of nugget? Is this a piece of the nugget of the pie? Telling you who some of these people of fame, with this reputation that they have, this character that they have. It will be prevalent and evident. It will be also according as well as the sign that was given. You will be able to know through the sign by seeing them and through the reputation of the character of these people.
All right. That's a fact to chew on. That's something you have to do your personal research on. Is Shem and the Nephilim somehow related? A lot of you are not going to like that. You're not going to like that. You know why? You're just not going to like it. Now, other things that need to be looked upon in this. So, is Abraham a Shemite or is he a Japhite? And if he's a Shemite, Shemite is half of something. What are they half of? And going back a little bit. Alright, so I ended in part 4 with the fact that we're trying to figure out, well, we trying to figure out. What it is, again, black people, black knowledge, white lepers story. Now, when you look at why Abraham is chosen to be this special family, I think a lot of times we're under the impression, those who are into the Bible and the whole Christian doctrine, you're under the impression that the people who are being written about are just common folks like yourself, right? Like our everyday people. We are everyday people, right? And so we're under the impression when they talk about the baby in the manger, oh, that's poor, meager, poor. They didn't even have a place to dwell, so they lived in a manger, right? And that, somebody, put in a Pappas reed and down the lake, and then somebody else takes them in and adopts them. It gives the impression psychologically that the people are poor people. Well, I'm here to tell you that this is all written about people of royalty. All people of lineage, bloodlines that are tied to royalness. I'm saying that again. The people that you'll read in these scriptures are all about people who have something to do with a certain bloodline. even when you come down to your Savior, Jesus Christ. Okay? Which again, I will say, I'm going to blow the minds when I open up that and tell you who he comes out of. Not what you thought he came out of, but according what ended up happening. And this is why specific people who, the Jewish people, never acknowledged that Jesus came from them, and this is why they didn't. But you got to stay tuned. Now, before we get to Jesus, we got to get here. We got to start here. Now, this is how they tie Abraham in to Shem, right? But isn't it ironic that the Hebrew people starts with Abraham? They don't start through Shem. They're starting through Abraham and his offsprings. As if all this other connection and ties and families are not the same blood. And let's look at why this might be. Now, as I read earlier in maybe part 3, where I read you the story about Terah, which is Abraham's father. And somehow Terah is put in the position in Nimrod's established or institution of empire as a prince. Terah, who's supposed to be a Shem, who is lineage of supposedly of Shem, right? Now, this is Abraham's father. Terah had 3 sons, Nahor, Haran, and Abraham. Now, isn't it ironic that some of the places that are named, that they will talk about the places that Abraham are going, one has the same name as his brother, Haran. Nahor is named after the grandfather, which is Terah's father, whose name was Nahor too. His name was Nahor, right? So it started with Terah because he's in this royal house of Nimrod, who is given a high authority and prince, right? And something about the birth of Abraham when he was born, right, is putting him in a Christ-like, he's having a Christ-like birth. Did you know that? That Abraham has what you would go in the scriptures and look, and you would say, man, this is kind of similar to what they say Christ was born. And let me read it to you. Abraham's born. Terah was 70 years old when he begat him, and Terah called his name of his son that was born to him Abram, because the king had raised him in those days and dignified him above all his princes that were with him. And the wise men of Nimrod. Now listen to this. This is the wise men that's going to come to Nimrod about the birth of Abrams. And it was in the night that Abram was born that all the servants of Terah and all the wise men of Nimrod and his conjurers came and ate and drank in the house of Terah. And they rejoiced with him on that night. And when all the wise men and conjurers went out from the house of Terah, they lifted up their eyes towards heaven that night to look at the stars, and they saw, and behold, one very large star came from the east and ran in the heavens. And he swallowed up the 4 stars from the 4 sides of the heavens. And all the wise men and the king and his conjurers were astonished at the sight. And the sages understood this matter, and they knew its import. And they said to each other, this only betokens the child that has been born to Terah this night, who will grow up and be fruitful and multiply and possess all the earth, he and his children forever. And he and his seeds will slay great kings and inherit their lands. And the wise men and conjurers went home that night, and in the morning all these wise men and conjurers rose up early and assembled in an appointed house. And they spoke and said to each other, behold, the sight that we saw last night is beholding from the king. It has not been made known to him. And should this thing get to know to the king in the latter days, he will say to us, why have you concealed this matter from me? And when shall we all suffer death? Therefore not let us go and tell the kings the sight which we saw, and the interpretation thereof, and we shall then remain clear. And they did so, and they all went to the king and bowed down to him to the ground, and they said, may the king live, may the king live. We heard that a son was born to Terah, the son of Nahor, the prince of thy host, and we yesternight came to his house, and we ate and drank and rejoiced with him that night. And when thy servant went out from the house of Terah to go to our respective homes to abide there for the night, we lifted our eyes up to heaven, and we saw a great star coming from the east. And the same star ran with great speed and swallowed up 4 great stars from 4 sides of the heavens. And thy servants were astonished at the sight which we saw, and were greatly terrified, and we made our judgment upon the sight, and knew by our wisdom the proper interpretation thereof. That the things apply to this child that is born to Terah, who will grow up and multiply greatly, and become powerful, and kill all the kings of the earth, and inherit all their lands, he and his seeds forever. All right. Now, right there, kind of sound a little bit of what happened when Jesus was born. Okay? It's talking about the 3 wise men seeing the stars, and then they went to tell, but they didn't tell Herod. No, why they couldn't? Well, I ain't gonna go there yet. So anyway. So Abraham is born with a particular night that the stars are shown, a sign in the stars, and these conjurers and these wise men are able to interpret it according to what is being said. Now, when I read Jasher, just like if I read the Bible, don't think that I'm thinking that just because I'm reading the book of Jasher that the same agenda of the Christian scriptures is not in the same thing in the Jashers. This here seems to be the construct or the contract to set up so it is legally for you to do what they're going to do when they take it, because the same people who are the ones who are giving this information for us to read are the same people who are ones who are benefiting from it. Let me say that again. Don't get it twisted. That just because I'm reading the scriptures from Jasher, as I'm saying that everything in the Jasher is to be legitimized, is just to tell you there's another aspect and there's a backdrop to some of the insight that is not given in the Bible. But the same people are the ones who constructing this and who have made it so that it still is they are the beneficiaries of what they're trying to establish. And that's what we got to understand. They're in cahoots. They're all in the same. This is why black people, black knowledge, white lepers story. Because these are the ones who need to establish this because of this is their story. This is their story. The problem is if you take the scriptures and talk about a time when there will be new books written, guess what them new books that got to be written? Those got to be the stories we got to put together, because we don't have a book. Think about it. We have no book. No book has been written. We're going to have to construct that book. Our own book. Huh? Oh, that sounds crazy, don't it? That we have to construct our own books. Because this is somebody else's book. This is about about them. but they have made you to be under the same umbrella when it don't really apply to you. And this is what this video is all about. Is to show you this ain't about us. This is about somebody else. And we have taken people who've taken this doctrine and tried to apply it and make it about them. This is their writings about them. Our books have not been constructed. We've been suppressed and oppressed globally. So how can our story be written? Think about that. How can our story be written if somebody has oppressed and colonized everybody and handcuffed them, took their language, their history and knowledge, and then gave them what they said that it is? So those books haven't been written yet. You're writing, you're interpreting from within the context of what he has made for himself, using what he took from you, but he's made it in a way that's really all about him. We have not had the straight direct about ourselves. Those books have not been made yet. We have to come to that mindset to understand we're going to have to do that. We're going to have to do that. So anyway, let's look at this. So what you have here, you have Tira, right? Tira is going to marry, or her children's mama is Amthello. She's the one who birthed Nahor, Haran, and Abraham. Now, Tira, let's go to Genesis 20 and 12, right? And if I tell you that Sarah is Moses' sister, you may not believe it. But there's something about this point I want to make. So Genesis 20:12 says this: and besides, she is truly my sister, the daughter of my father, only not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. I'm going to read that again. And besides, she is truly my sister, the daughter of my father, only not the daughter of my mother. So basically, what is Abraham saying is that she is my sister. We got the same father, but we got different mothers. Now, with that being said is this: if Sarah has a different mother, what line of descent does Sarah come from? I'm going to say that again. According to Genesis chapter 20, verses 12, well, Abraham clearly states she is his sister. They got the same father, but they got different mothers. And those who didn't know who Abraham's mother is, that's Amthello. She is the daughter of Conebo. Okay? And so Sarah has the same father, which gives them the same kind of bloodline, but there's another offshoot in Sarah because she has a different mother. But they don't give you any backdrop. You cannot find the backdrop to Sarah's mother. Well, is it because she's concubine? Because see, they have this thing by saying that a concubine, right? When they throw that word concubine, it's just basically a woman who cohabits with the man without being married to him. You know, they say baby's mama today, right? You have baby's mama, but that don't necessarily mean that that ain't your child just because you ain't legally, according to how your states and city say what is considered marriage, but you can still be married without that paper. According to law, says 7 years together, they would call that what? Does anybody know? They call that, oh man, it slips my mind. It'll come back to me. But there's a term they use when they say you still married even though you don't have the paper. So by putting the label concubine on it, and also when you look among polygamous people, it's just basically a secondary wife. And we say today, baby's mama just means that, well, this is a relationship, this is somebody you was dealing with, and that relationship never changed as long as the child is there, you may never even deal with her anymore or the child. But as them bloodlines tying together, that ain't gonna never change. So what I'm saying here is, if Sarah has a different mother than Abraham, then who is the mother of Sarah? And so that means that in this lineage coming in through Sarah, that they say they're going to produce Isaac, there's another line inside of them, and it ain't all just Abraham, Terah. But this is the foundation they're trying to make it appear to only be about them. Well, the reason why is because of this. This is an all in the family game. Huh? Say that again. This is an all in the family game. And why did this particular family stay all in the family and didn't go outside? Well, some will say, well, that was part of the tradition of the time. And of course it was. Because let's just look at the simple fact that when Isaac met Rebecca, right? Let's give a little backdrop. Did you know Isaac was 40 years old and Rebecca was only 13? In today's society, you know what they would call that? Do you know that? Let me give you some other to the backdrop of some of this other stuff before I even go there. So I told you Sarah is Abraham's brother. And they're going to produce Isaac. Abraham also had another wife, Hagar, who produces Ishmael. He had another wife who was Keturah, who they produced 6 sons, right? So with Abraham in itself, there's at least 8 children, 8 sons, right? But we're only going to talk about the one Isaac. We're not going to talk about the 6 from Keturah and Ishmael. Well, he's kind of mentioned, but not mentioned much. See, every time you get to that part where you know exclusive it is this, they're going to turn it. So they're trying to keep it in a one particular way when they're doing this. As if somehow your blood don't count. Why don't your blood count? So so let's just say, and I only saying this as hypothetically speaking, because I don't consider what they do to be legitimized anyway. So let's say that so-called Prince Harry went into Africa when they went in on the trip, and he went and, knocked up one of them. Right? Would that baby be legitimized to the throne? Could it somehow come back and bite them in the ass? It could. Right? So it's kind of like saying, what some people say what happened with Princess Diana. Okay? And say when she got with that Muslim cat, that they was putting the line, the throne line in jeopardy by bringing in having was going to have a child with him, was putting a threat to the throne. They had to knock her. Had to knock her out. So in this case, they didn't knock them, they just rid them out. And as that's like when you going to talk about these only 12 tribe people, the other ones don't count. They're not legitified or legitimized, right? Just like when you look at Lots, the Moabites and the Ammonites, they're not legitimized as so-called Israelites. So, but this family is kind of, this family is kind of wild when you look at it. You got Sarah, right? And Abraham, who are brothers and sisters. Terah, right? Okay. Then you got Haran, right? Who has a daughter named Milcah, that his brother Nahor, right? He takes his niece and produces 8 children out of her. Huh? And you got Bethuel, who's going to make Laban, right? Laban, Bethel, who's also going to make Laban, who's going to make Rebecca, because they related. Yeah, the same Rebecca that's going to end up with Isaac, that was Laban's sister. And so what you have is Dinah and Laban who are going to produce Leah and Rachel. Now, did you know that Leah and Rachel were twins? Leah and Rachel were twins. Just like Esau and Jacob were twins. Now, check this out. So you have Jacob. Now, this is something I want to tell, because I know people do not know this. Because when you just hear that name, and these people in these organizations, they don't have no problem talking about this. Oh, you know, we the tribe of Israel, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So let's look at this. So you got Isaac, who's 40 years old, gets with Rebecca, who's 13. Then they produce twins, right? Jacob and Esau. Now you got Rebecca's brother is Laban, who marries Dinah. And Dinah and Laban produces Leah and Rachel, which they were twins. Okay? Now what you have is Jacob, right? Now know this story. Did you know that at the time that Jacob marries, he is 85 years old? Do you know how old Leah and Rachel is? They're only 29 years old. I'm going to say that again. 85-year-old with the 29-year-old, and guess what? They are related too. And so, what you have now is twins with twins. But there's something that's going to happen in here that is going to be unexplainable, and it goes to show why the so-called Jew don't accept Jesus as a part of their people, is because something fell out. So Jacob, let's look at this. Esau is going to produce the Edomites, and he's a twin. So here is Jacob, 85 years old, got two 29-year-olds, plus he got concubines. Now, anybody recognize the fact that how you going to be poor and you got concubines? Huh? See, Abraham got his. See, let me give you something else too. Let me go back a little bit. You know how Abraham got, you know how you read in the scriptures that talked about how when Abraham went to Egypt and then told Sarah to pretend that he is sister, and that if the Egyptians seen you, they would want you, and you know what I'm saying? So I got to pretend like that, and then when he found out that he was a sister, you know, get the hell out of here. Here's all this gold and camels and maid servants, and be gone. But if you read in the book of Jasher, and I'm going to read it for you, so I think this is important. Alright, so it says, Abraham flees Nimrod. And when the king heard the words of Abram, he ordered him to be put into prison. And Abram was 10 days in prison. At the end of those days, the king ordered that all the king, prince, and governors of different provinces and the sages should come before him. And they sat down before him. And Abram was still in the house of the confinement. And the king said to the princes and the sages, have you heard what Abram the son of Cherah has done to his father? Thus has he done to him, and I ordered him to be brought before me, and thus has he spoken. His heart did not misgive him, neither did he stir in my presence. And behold, now he is confined in the prison. And therefore decide what judgment is due to this man who reviled the king, who spoke and did all the things that you heard. And they all answered the king, saying, the man who reviled the king should be hanged upon a tree. But having done all these things that he said, and having despised our God, he must therefore be burned to death. For this is the law in this manner. If it pleases the king to do this, let him order his servant to kindle a fire both night and day, and thy brick furnace, and when we will cast this man into it. And the king did so. And he commanded servants that they should prepare a fire for 3 days and 3 nights in the king's furnace, that it is in Casdim. And the king ordered them to take Abram from prison and bring him out to be burned. And all the king's servants, princes, lord, governors, and judges, and all the inhabitants of the land, about 900,000 men, stood opposite the furnace to see Abram. And all the women and little ones crowded upon the roofs and towers to see what he was doing with Abram's. And they all stood together at a distance. And there was not a man left that did not come on that day to behold the scene. And when Abram was come, the conjurers of the kings and the sages saw Abram, and they cried out to the king, saying, Our sovereign Lord, surely this is the man whom we know to have been the child at whose birth the great star swallowed the 4 stars, which we declared to the king now 50 years since. And behold, now his father has also transgressed thy commands, and mocked thee by bringing thee another child, who thou didst kill. And when the king heard the words, he was exceeding wroth, and he ordered Terah to be brought before him. And the king said, Hast thou heard what the conjurers have spoken? Now tell me truly, how didst thou? And if thou shalt speak thou truth, shalt be acquitted. And seeing that the king's anger was so much kindled, Terah said to the king, My lord and king, thou hast heard the truth, and what the sages have spoken is right. And the king said, How couldst thou do this thing, to transgress my orders, and give a child that thou didst not beget, and take value for him? And Terah answered the king, Because my tender feelings was excited for my son at that time, and I took a son of my handmaid, and I brought him to the king. And the king said, Who advised thee to this? Tell me, do not hide aught from me, and thou shalt not die. And Terah went greatly terrified in the king's presence, and he said to the king, It was Haran, my eldest son, who advised me to do this. And Haran in those days that Abram was born 32 years old. But Haran did not advise his father to do anything, for Terah said this to the king in order to deliver his soul from the king, for he feared greatly. And the king said to Terah, Haran thy son, who advised thee to this, shall die through fire with Abram. For the sentence of death is upon him for having rebelled against the king's desire and doing this thing. And Haran at the time felt inclined to follow the ways of Abram, but he kept in within himself. Haran said in his heart, Behold, the king, he sees Abram on account of these things which Abram did, and it shall come to pass that if Abram prevail over the king, I will follow him. But if the king prevail, I will go after the king. And when Terah had spoken this to the king concerning Haran his son, the king ordered Haran to be seized with Abram. And they brought them both, Abram and Haran, both brothers, cast them into the fire. All the inhabitants of the land and the king's servants and princes, and all the women and little ones were there, standing there that day over them. And the king's servant took Abram and his brothers, and they stripped them off of their clothes, excepting the lower garments which were upon them. And they bound their hands and feet in linen cord and service. The king lifted them up and cast them both into the furnace. And the Lord loved Abram, and he had compassion over him. And the Lord came down to deliver Abram from the fire, as he was not burned. But all the cords which bound him were burned, while Abram remained and walked above the fire. And Haran died when they had cast him into the fire, and he was burned to ashes. For his heart was not perfect with the Lord. And those men who cast him into the fire, the flames of the fire spread over them, and they were burned, and 12 men of them died. And Abram walked in the midst of the fire 3 days and 3 nights. All right, I can read more. But those who know the Bible, does that story sound familiar? Does that sound like Daniel, Meshach, Abednego in the furnace? Did they plagiarize the Daniel story from this story here? Or is it vice versa? This being Abram, which would be older, it means this was first. Black people, black knowledge, white story.
See, because he's half. Half of what? He's half of what? Is he half Nephilim? Because he can't be half Noah and half, is he half Noah? Is he half Namah? half what? The Semite people or the Shemite people are half of what? A half of Japhet, half a Ham? What is the half? But it is ironic that Shem name means fame, and that the Nephilim's name means what? Fame. The men of fame. Is that ironic, or is that evidence, a fingerprint, something left so that it would be obvious for those who are seeking and digging for this knowledge, digging for that buried treasure, and trying to sift through all this and trying to find that piece of nugget? Is this a piece of the nugget of the pie? Telling you who some of these people of fame, with this reputation that they have, this character that they have. It would be prevalent and evident. It would be also according as well as the sign that was given. You will be able to know through the sign by seeing them and through the reputation of the character of these people.